What's up everyone? Today is going to be a bit of a more chill video. What I'm going to do is I'm going to sit here and answer some of the questions that you guys answered me. Answered me? That you guys asked me. If you want to submit questions for a video like this in the future, make sure you watch the YouTube community tab and Twitter. I always put posts up on both of those basically asking for questions. So with all that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump right into the questions. First, let's talk about the sponsor for this video. Absolutely no one, because I don't get sponsors. Now on to the first question. What if Bungie never left Halo? I see this thrown around a lot on Twitter, where people will say something along the lines of like, oh, I wish Bungie never left Halo. They made so much better games than 343 does now. And if Bungie was still here, Halo would be in such a better place than it is currently. And honestly, I hate seeing that because I don't really think it's true. So the first thing I want to point out is that Bungie wasn't perfect. Halo CE, Halo 2, and Halo 3 are fantastic games. Halo ODST is cool, and Halo Reach, even if you like Halo Reach, you have to admit it's a pretty divisive game. Bungie was starting to make some serious core changes to Halo, and whether or not they would have roped those back in future games is totally unknown. Now, if you want to look at their future project, Destiny, they have gone full bore with abilities and super overpowered weapons and all these insta-kills, and now I'm not saying that they would have continued to put stuff like that into Halo, but I think Reach was the testing ground for some of that stuff. Now let's also talk about the fact that Bungie just didn't want to make Halo anymore. A lot of the developers at Bungie were sick and tired of making Halo games. They had been making them since the early 2000s, even earlier than that when they probably started working on CE, and that was all they had been working on all the way up through Reach in 2010. Microsoft wasn't allowing them to make other games like they had in the past with the Marathon series and other stuff. And that is one of the main reasons that Bungie wanted to leave. Not only did they want to be able to own the IP that they're working on, they also just wanted to work on other things. You could say it's kind of ironic now as they've gone on to work on Destiny and Destiny 2, and that's basically it. But I think there is something to the fact that they just were tired of making Halo games. So basically, I think if they had stuck around, they would have had to have really had the desire to keep making Halo games. But even at that, I don't really think we'd be in much of a different spot. Reach really was a divisive game that really split the community, honestly totally killed the competitive side of Halo, and there's really no saying that future Bungie Halo games would have been able to rein that back in and get more of that love that the original trilogy did. Alright, the next question comes from Carlos Emilio on the YouTube community tab, and he asks, what are your thoughts on sprint in Halo? I won't go super in depth into this one as it's kind of a question I've covered in various videos on my channel, but the basic gist of it is that I don't really mind sprint in Halo, although I would love to see a non-sprint classic style Halo game put out in modern times. And I'm not talking about just re-releasing Halo 3 or something like that. I'm talking about an actual new game with tons of new content and some different changes to the sandbox that aren't just adding sprint and Spartan abilities into it. Now, that said, I really don't think sprint is the biggest issue that Halo 4 and Halo 5 have had, or even Halo Reach to that matter. I think those games have had so many other issues that have led to Halo's drop-off, but for some reason everyone just focuses in on sprint. One big thing that comes to mind to me is just map design in general. I think that's really been lacking in the later Halo games, and I don't really think that it is sprint's fault, although for some reason people attribute it to that. I think Halo could easily be just as successful as it was in the past with sprint. They just have to properly build the game around sprint, which is something they haven't really been able to do. Another issue that comes to mind for me, especially in the case of something like Halo 5, is just these half-baked releases that we've been getting. Halo 5 did it where it dropped missing a ton of content, and even MCC on PC has done the same thing where it was missing things like Forge and Theater when it released. Now that said, if you follow the channel for a while, you do know that I did enjoy Halo 5's gameplay, so I'm not totally anti-sprint or anything like that. Alright, the next question comes on Twitter from Sean Boyle, and he asks, what are your thoughts on customizing Master Chief in the Halo Infinite campaign, similar to what Doom Eternal does? So if you don't know, in Doom Eternal, you can equip the Doomslayer, the main character in the campaign, with all sorts of different skins and different customizables that you can unlock by either playing the game, or I think some of them might be DLC. I'd have to double check on that. Honestly, I'd be totally on board with this, especially if they were able to work this into some type of unlockable system built into the game. Like if you got all the skulls, or if you did super cool campaign challenges, you could get cool different armor sets that you could use for campaign on the Master Chief. Now obviously the canon version of the game would have Master Chief in his default armor, but I have no issues at all allowing players to customize Master Chief in any way they want, as that just gives the players more options. If you want to play Master Chief as he was created with the Halo Infinite armor, that's totally fine and you can do that. But if you want to play a Master Chief that has rainbow colored armor, well, so be it. It's totally up to you and how you want to mold your gameplay experience. I have absolutely no issues if they were to implement Master Chief customization in the campaign. I really don't think it hurts the vision of the game at all, because like I said, you can choose to use it or not to use it. Now obviously these armors and stuff that you would unlock would hopefully be cosmetic only, so that someone playing with the default Master Chief armor wasn't missing out on cool mechanics or anything like that just because they didn't want to use flashy armors. Next up is another question on Twitter from @Trevland37, and he asks, do you think that we will know all the Halo secrets and cut ideas and content? Honestly, no. I don't think there's any way that we'll ever learn all of the cut content for the different Halo games, and the reason I say this is I think it's almost impossible. There's so many ideas that come up when designing a game that never even make it out of like the brainstorming phase or the early initial designs, and there's probably hundreds and thousands of little ideas and little design choices and little mechanics that never made their way into a Halo game, but at one point you could say were cut. Now if you're talking about things that actually made it pretty far into design iteration and then were cut, now I think that it's possible that we could learn more of that stuff over time if developers decide to come out, or if the community really dives deep into the code of these games and kind of figures things out. Now on the secret front, I do think it's a lot more possible for the community to kind of unearth all the secrets that actually got put into the game, especially as over time, if these secrets never come out, I think developers that worked on those games will kind of start to leak them just because they kind of want us to find out about them, whether it's 5 years from now or 10 years from now. Someone eventually is going to surface and say like, hey, there's this thing in Halo CE that no one's ever uncovered, and eventually I think all that stuff will make its way out into the public. The next question from the YouTube community tab comes from Phalanx. I'm not totally sure how to pronounce that, but he asks, do you think Halo 5 will come to PC as a standalone game with crossplay? I'm going to be honest with you, no. Not only do I think it's outside of the scope of what 343 really wants to do, I also think it completely missed the boat. If they were going to put Halo 5 on PC, they should have done it years ago when they released Halo 5 Forge. That was only about a year into Halo 5's lifespan, and if they had actually put Halo 5 on PC back then with full support, I think it could have fostered at least somewhat of a community on PC. However, now the game is 5 or 6 years old, and we're about to go into Halo Infinite. By the time that 343 could even get Halo 5 out on PC and with crossplay, you'd pretty much be at the release of Halo Infinite. And at that point, other than the campaign being on PC for players to be able to play the entire Halo franchise, there's almost no point to bring Halo 5 to PC at that point. The multiplayer really wouldn't have a player base because everyone at that point is just going to be playing Infinite, or the few people that aren't playing Infinite are probably still going to be playing MCC because they prefer the classic style game. I really don't imagine there being a big subset of the player base on PC that wants to play Halo 5 post the release of Halo Infinite. If it was out currently, I do think some people on PC would be playing Halo 5, although you could question if that player base is even big enough to justify releasing the game today if it was ready. Like I said though, I think they missed a huge opportunity not releasing this years ago when they released Halo 5 Forge on PC, because I think then they could have fostered a cool PC community, which would have brought Halo back to PC even sooner and began to foster that PC Halo community for even longer, building up to Halo Infinite. Alright, the next question coming from Payne on Twitter is, at what point does Microsoft give up on mainstream Halo games and do drastic spin-offs, i.e. a flood horror game or something like an ODST 2? Here's the thing, I don't think Microsoft needs to give up on mainstream Halo games to do those. I think that Halo is really missing out on the opportunity to do cool spin-offs for as long as Halo has been going. There's no reason to me why you couldn't have 343 working on mainstream Halo games and hire another developer to create cool spin-offs in the off years, especially if they're not even like multiplayer games. You wouldn't even be competing with the player base of Halo Infinite or whatever Halo was out at the time. I think the community as a whole would love to see the Halo IP develop in cool different ways that we aren't currently seeing just in the mainline games. Currently, the only real spin-off series that we've gotten is the Halo Wars franchise, which has fostered its own fan base and community and is a really cool spin-off for the Halo franchise, especially for people who like RTS games, or for some people that aren't even Halo fans, they enjoy Halo Wars just for the RTS aspects. Another question on Twitter comes from @SodaClips, and he asks, with Cyberpunk, Destiny, and Call of Duty Cold War releasing, do you think it was smart to delay Halo Infinite to a possibly less competitive date? To that, I would say no. Halo is a big enough brand name and a big enough franchise, and it has so much money behind it, it shouldn't be moving its release date to avoid other games. If 343 puts out a good Halo game, it's going to sell a ton, and it's going to have a ton of players, regardless of if it releases in the same month that a Call of Duty game releases or Cyberpunk releases. Plus, out of those options, I really don't even know if you're necessarily competing for the same exact players. Cyberpunk is a really long, immersive RPG most likely. Destiny is like a MMO light game, and Call of Duty Cold War is a multiplayer shooter similar to a Halo Infinite, so that's probably your closest competition. But if we're being honest, a lot of the people that play Call of Duty today probably don't play Halo unless Halo Infinite is really good and it brings a lot of those players over to the Halo franchise. Halo is enough of an established brand, in my opinion, that it really doesn't need to worry about when it releases. All they need to worry about is releasing a good game, and the rest of it will all work itself out. Next up, we have a question from Kitty Catty. Is that how you say that? And they ask, do you think people give 343 some unnecessary hate, parenthesis, not valid stuff, out of sheer pettiness / just hate to 343? Honestly, yes and no. I think some of the hate that 343 gets is deserved. They've made a lot of mistakes over the years, and a lot of people are just kind of fed up with that, and that's where you get some of that pettiness and some of that hatred toward them. It's just people that like Halo that are really fed up with it, and when little things happen, it really irks them, because in a lot of cases, it's the same mistakes that we see over and over and over. Now, on the flip side, I think there's some people that just absolutely hate 343, and it doesn't even matter what they do at all, they're still going to criticize 343. Some of those people, from what I can tell, don't even play Halo anymore, they don't like any of the 343 Halo games, and they don't play MCC, and they don't even play the classic games anymore because they're bored of them, but for some reason they still stick around Halo just to get mad when 343 makes decisions, and I don't really understand that. I get that you're a Halo fan, but if you haven't enjoyed Halo in 10 years, it's probably healthier for you to just move on and do something else. Go play other games, go find other franchises that you enjoy more. 343 isn't the only developer out there. If you really hate what they're doing, there's plenty of other developers that you might be more satisfied with. Unfortunately, Halo as a franchise has just been going on for so long. There's people that were fans of the original trilogy, and those fans still stick around, and they might not necessarily like the direction that 343 has taken the franchise, but they still cling to that hope that Halo is going to return to the game that they really like. I think it's just something that happens to any game franchise or movie franchise that goes on for a long time. You just have people that attach to different games over the years and different mechanics, and as the franchise moves and changes, they might not necessarily like that for valid or not valid reasons, and therefore you do just get a lot of built-up animosity toward the developer, in this case 343. Now that said, some of the hate that 343 gets is definitely unnecessary and not valid, and it is definitely out of sheer pettiness and hate for 343. I'm sure if you are on Halo Twitter a lot, some of those people immediately come to mind. I'm not going to throw their names out because I just don't care enough. Moving on to the next question. This question comes from Aha Lover on Twitter, and they ask, do you think Halo Infinite will be a good game? Honestly, I have no clue. I hope it's a good game, but I think there is a lot of reason for concern that we've been seeing trickle out over the past few months. Hopefully this delay allows 343 to really polish up the game and make sure that they put out a good product. But honestly, I think even with the delay, we still could end up getting a half-baked product on launch. 343 doesn't necessarily have the greatest track record when it comes to releasing games, so I think there's a lot of reason to be concerned. As for specific mechanics that we saw from the gameplay reveal, that's a crapshoot too. Who knows how many of those mechanics are going to make their way over to multiplayer, or how that's going to play out in a multiplayer environment. And a lot of that, I think I'm just going to have to wait and see how it plays once I'm able to actually get my hands on it. I think one thing that could really help ensure that we get a better game is if 343 was able to put out a Halo Infinite multiplayer beta later this year or early next year. I think that would really help us get into the game, kind of see how it's coming along, give our feedback to them, and hopefully, if there are glaring issues, they'd be able to fix those before the game released. My biggest concern is that once the game actually releases, we have a repeat of Halo 5 where the multiplayer is just missing a ton of features. That is the absolute last thing that we can see in this release, as that really could be the nail in the coffin for Infinite, especially after waiting all these years for the game to come out. Next up, we have a question from Noah O, and he asks, if you could only play 3 games for the rest of your life, what games would you pick? No compilations and only one Halo game. So to answer this, I'm going to make the assumption that if I pick a multiplayer game, it's guaranteed that it has a somewhat healthy player base for the rest of my life, because otherwise it would get too hard to pick a multiplayer game, and I would almost have to pick a bunch of single player games. But for the sake of this question, we're just going to imagine that the game has a healthy player base forever. The first game I'd obviously pick is Halo 3, especially OG Halo 3. I would love to go back to OG Halo 3, or even MCC Halo 3, honestly, and play that with a healthy player base. It's one of the best games of all time, and if modded content was able to make its way into it, that would just keep the game fresh, and it's just an amazing game. The second game that I would go with would probably be, honestly, Counter-Strike Go. I've played a ton of Counter-Strike, and it's just one of those games where the concept of the game is pretty simple and straightforward, but it's the intricacies that really make the game fresh, even after you've played it for thousands and thousands of hours. While I haven't been playing a ton of Counter-Strike as of late, it's a game that I've put a ton of time into in the past, and I wouldn't mind playing a ton more of that going forward. Especially if they port it over to Source 2, that'd be pretty sweet. My biggest gripe with Counter-Strike is the matchmaking system and the built-in ranking system. If either of those got revamped, I'd probably jump back in today and start playing a bit. While I never minded the third-party pugging softwares while I was really into the game, now that I play it more casually, I don't want to have to go to Faceit or to ESEA to play competitive games. I just want to be able to launch up the game and queue a ranked match, and not have to worry about running into like 4 hackers or having no incentive to try and rank up again. Now for the last game, I'm going to pick something that's probably a little bit surprising, and honestly it's just Hearthstone. Hearthstone is just a game that I still play from time to time. It's just super casual, and it's just something I can play like while I watch a movie on my other screen or while I watch a Twitch stream. It's just super casual and super basic, and I've played a ton of that game, and honestly, I don't mind it, even though I haven't really kept up with the recent expansions. Next up, Philippa Dog asks, do you think Apex Legends can truly be a 10-year-old live service game like EA and Respawn say it can? I for one think it can be if they add more than a BR. That seems to be what they're doing since they added that weird PvE mode, and there's rumors of an arena FPS type game mode coming in Season 7. If it were just BR, then no though. To that, I would say, honestly, I don't really see any reason why Apex couldn't be a 10-year live service game, especially since it's built in the Titanfall universe, and quote-unquote Titanfall 3 could really just be that arena mode that could come in Season 7 or Season 8. It wouldn't really be Titanfall 3, but you could add in an arena mode into Apex that played a lot more like Titanfall, or even use the characters and the mechanics of Apex, and I think that would actually play really well. I would love to hop back into Apex and play a more arena based game mode as opposed to a battle royale, because I'm just a little bit sick of battle royales overall. As a game and a product though, Apex is really solid, and they do a really good job with the updates and adding new content and doing cool limited time events. As long as Respawn is still supporting Apex, I think there's still going to be a player base that wants to play it. The core gunplay and core mechanics of Apex are just so solid that as long as you don't screw those up somehow with updates, it's always going to be a pretty enjoyable game to get back into. I personally haven't played it too much in the past few seasons, but I've played a ton of Apex in the past, and it's probably my favorite battle royale. The only downside is it's still a battle royale, and I just am a little bit sick of those these days. The next question comes from That Man Frosty, and he asks, if you had to choose between a populated Halo 3 MCC versus a populated Halo Online, what would you choose? I'm probably going to give an answer here that you wouldn't expect, and I would say Halo 3 on MCC. My main reason for this is that while Halo Online is a really cool game and it has a lot of customizability and there's so many cool mods that have been added into the game and things like that, it's just missing core aspects that MCC has. For example, matchmaking and ranked matchmaking. And while I don't mind hopping onto a server browser here and there to try and play different game modes, I like being able to launch a game, hop into matchmaking, and just play some ranked or some social. I don't necessarily always want to have to go into a server browser and try and find a server that sounds like fun to me. Especially since I think Halo 3 MCC still has so much more room that it could be improved upon if 343 wants. If they add more mod support, it's going to get a lot better. Once we get crossplay, it's going to get a lot better. Input-based matchmaking, while I'm a little bit skeptical about that, will make it a better experience for some people. And I just think that Halo 3 MCC has so much more room for it to improve, where Halo Online, it kind of just is what it is. It was a really sweet product and I loved playing it back when it was populated, but at the end of the day, Halo Online is a modded version of a canceled game that was kind of jank to begin with, and I don't know if with more work, Halo Online could ever shed that. I guess if they were allowed to work on it again, they could add things like matchmaking into it, and that would really improve the experience for someone like me, but I would still go with Halo 3 MCC, oddly enough. I think in an ideal world, Halo Online wouldn't have died, and both of them would have their own player bases, kind of like how Project Cartographer still has its own little niche community. I wish Halo Online still had that, so if you wanted to play Halo Online, you could hop over there and play whatever you wanted, but if you wanted to just go and play some ranked Team Slayer, then you could hop on H3 MCC. And that kind of does it for serious questions. I'm going to hit some more fun questions on the way out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll probably do another one next month, so make sure you look out for that if you want to ask any questions. If I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry about that, but make sure to either ask again or ask a different question next time and I might get to it. So the next question by Late Night Gaming, he asks, if you could have Master Chief spend a weekend at your place, what activities would you do with him? But it has to be at your house because there's a pandemic after all. What if I just made Master Chief sit down and play some Halo with me, just like RB and the Chief? I think that would be my go-to. Kevin Kulex asks, since people put coats on to stay warm, would it mean that armor coatings would help keep your Spartan warm in Halo Infinite? Hopefully, because I don't want my little Spartan to be chilly. And last but not least, Zake, whose name I still can't pronounce to this day, asks, I hate to do this, but I have to. How bad will we lose to Ohio State? So if you guys don't understand this question, he's asking about Nebraska football because we're both Nebraska natives and Nebraska fans. And I don't think it's going to be a very good game. I'm going to guess we lose by like 3 or 4 touchdowns, and hopefully it's better than that. If it's like the game a couple years ago where we played them close, I'll be pretty happy. And that's it, guys. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, you know what to do. If you guys want to catch me live, I stream over on Twitch, so come over there and hang out with me. I have a lot of fun just talking to chat. Sometimes we play BTB together or do all sorts of different community events. And if that isn't enough me for you, you can also follow me on Twitter, where you can submit questions for something like this in the future. And with that said, I'll see you all next time.